Hi. Yeah, I haven't been with you before, but I did see a recording, and I really loved it a while ago. And so I been trying to make it. And I just grabbed my lecture and
here.
Can't say I'm like totally prepared, but certainly read it a number of times, just not recently, but living it, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Alan, I haven't seen you in a long time. Nice to see you.
Same here. Same here. Good to see you.
Beverly.
Hi, Beverly.
Oh, hi, Beverly. Haven't seen you.
Is it okay that I joined, even though I got an invitation, but I'm not part of your group, regular group?
Definitely.
Well, Margaret, maybe you should introduce yourself to.
Okay. Are we ready to begin? I just kind of barged in.
Well, might as well begin. Go ahead.
Okay. If you want me to, shall I? Okay. I'm Margaret Mary Cliggett Reynolds, and I studied the pathwork for many years and became a helper and teacher, and I live in Woodstock. And let's see, after I was a pathwork helper, I became a licensed psychotherapist in the state of New York. And where are you guys? Where are you all?
Mostly we're in New York.
Are you? Oh.
I guess we can all go around quickly, just a quick introduction. That would be nice, right?
Okay, all right.
Okay, and I'm in Brooklyn. I'm in Brooklyn.
And I'm here I'm in upstate New York right now in Garrison, but I live in Brooklyn. And Manhattan, where my mom is, who's 99 and help her and still in excellent shape. She's smarter than me, and her mind is as sharp as pick your metaphor. She's great.
That's wonderful. I'm out in Long Island, Margaret. Hi. I've been a Pathwork student for a couple of years now, a few years. I'm out in Long Island.
Hi, this is Juan. I'm here in Queens, and I've been studying the Pathwork for about 6 years now, and I love it, and it's been life transmuting for me. So it's a great thing. So yeah, and I'm here in Queens, as I said.
Hi there. I'm in Westchester, Lower Westchester. I was in Manhattan for many years, and I've kind of I read the lectures really many years ago, but I've just been here a couple of times, in and out.
I'm Beverly. I live in Brooklyn.
Nancy, can you hear us? Nancy Witherell?
I finally can.
Okay, we're saying hello to Margaret Mary. It's her first time.
You're all talking to me. Sorry, I feel like hello. Sorry, I didn't respond.
That's all right.
Oh, and Jared.
So Nancy.
Nancy, hi Nancy.
I'm Nancy, and I live in Brooklyn, except I'm living in New Hampshire these days.
Right. You all know each other. That's the thing. Is that what you're saying?
Well, everyone here except for you and Jerem have been to a lot of our Pathwork evenings, our Zooms, and Jerem is also Pathwork helper from way back from Woodstock, from that area. Greetings.
Jerem. Hi.
Hi, Jerem.
Oh, Jerem.
You all.
What's your last name?
Egan.
Oh, Jerry Egan.
Yeah, that means yes in Hungarian.
Hey, Margaret Mary.
Hi. Where are you now?
Living in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, God.
Oh, wow.
Do you know I'm married to Farrell Reynolds?
I do, yeah. I got to see you both together some years back.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Okay.
But
I met him after he came to you for a massage. Right afterwards. That's what I
remember that.
And Teresa, say something. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi Alan. Yes, I can hear you. I'm Teresa. I'm also in Queens, and happy to be here. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi guys. Good to see you.
Well, everyone, I guess let's start talking about this lecture without any further ado. Also, Steve Schwartzberg was going to be here tonight, and he emailed me and he said that he's recovering from kidney stone surgery. Oh. He sends his love to everybody, especially to you, Tracy, and Joel. And also,
I didn't hear the name. What's his first name?
Sid Schwartzberg. he's been here, and he's also a longtime path worker from the New York area. Also, I also got an email. Marion Lewis was not able to make it tonight. She's always here. So she was also having a difficult time. I think she's had some, she's not well, but she doesn't have a serious illness, but she doesn't feel well enough to make the meeting. So. All right. So fellow pathworkers, thank you so much for coming tonight. And I'm going to give a short summary, some of my thoughts about this lecture. This lecture is a lecture in which there's only a few lectures like this, the way I see it, where the guide really kind of aggressively takes things on in the world right now. I mean, there are a few people who would say that communications is not a huge issue and a major challenge today. And the guide talks about how to communicate. He gives a brief outline about how we should communicate. And let me read that quickly as a meditation. He says,
you want to say what page you're on? Do you
Page
mind?
5. He says, communication is the result of serious effort with a commitment to use your attention and your energies to make yourself understood in the best possible way and to understand the other. For both purposes, you need to empty the mind of all preconceived ideas your lower self has a stake in retaining. You need to put aside enmity and distrust. You need to summon the maturity to realize that others do not know what you mean, feel, think, and want. You need to explain yourself in the deepest, most sincere way possible. If you proceed that way, you will find no problem between you and others that cannot be resolved. Great strength and self-esteem will grow from this, my friends. Now, I'm sure we've often given advice to younger people, like, you know, kids just starting out looking for a job, and it's like, people do not know what you want. People do not automatically understand who you are. You have to communicate and you have to explain, especially when it comes to asking for something that you need. People are ashamed to do it. So this issue of communicating, not assuming that people know what you want, and becoming very honest. And of course, the first thing you have to do is become honest with yourself. You know, the guide talks, of course, in many lectures, and this one also, about sort of gives a historical perspective that in previous eras, you know, people did not really know themselves and did not communicate very well. They didn't understand psychology. They didn't understand where they were blocked. They didn't understand a lot that we now are getting to know because of the advancements we've made in psychology. So before I talk about the three basic things the guide talks about here, communication, group consciousness, and exposure, I want to just bring out two concepts that come through in this lecture that are common to many lectures. And the first is on page 1. The guide says, you believe that what is good is and right at this moment will also ultimately be good and right. You believe that what may appear evil to you now is also ultimately evil. This is hardly the case. Sometimes an outright negative manifestation may indeed be necessary for a total development to take place. This applies to the individual as well as to mankind as a whole, or to put it differently, to the entity Earth. So this is something that the guide very often says, which is, what may appear bad may not be bad. What may appear good may be bad. So, you know, you can't necessarily look at an immediate manifestation and make a determination as to whether it's good or bad. And it reminds me of lecture 183, the lecture about crisis creating change. A crisis may appear to be bad, but on the other hand, it may actually be the best thing. And the guide also recaps that later on, where he talks about the New Age and the influx. On page 6, he says, the new influx, called the New Age, also affects outer events, often in a most obscure way. What may appear an entirely undesirable negative occurrence is in reality a necessity for establishing new values and reestablishing life based on spiritual premises, truth and love. In other words, destructiveness that has advanced so far that it can no longer be changed, molded, or transformed needs to be destroyed before a new and better structure can be erected. So that's one concept, the concept that what may appear destructive may actually be creative, positive. What may appear positive may actually be negative. So in other words, one has to approach every situation with a lot of self-search and insight, trying to determine, what the meaning of it is, and not to adopt a facile concept, understanding of what's going on. Then the second concept I want to talk about, which the guide talks about in many lectures, which is something I touched on in my essay, if any of you guys read my essay that I wrote, which is that the lower self helps you along to find greater depths in your own self-search. He talks about this on page 4. He says, when two entities, either individual or collective ones, are involved in a negative interaction, a deeper purpose is being fulfilled, even if the interaction has the most undesirable result at the moment. The higher selves of both entities are always at work. The higher self has not created the negative interaction per se, but it uses what already exists, negativity, for the purpose of dissolving it. So in other words, whatever is going on, there's always a higher purpose, higher self-purpose behind it. So those are the two concepts I want to think about in terms of enduring concepts in the lectures. And I just wanted to put those out to you guys before talking about the 3 aspects the guide talks about, which I'll briefly recap, and then we can all talk about our impressions and our thoughts. The 3 concepts are communication, group consciousness, and exposure. On page 2, he says, it is no coincidence that one of the major byproducts of modern technology is communication. Now, if anything, that's an understatement. I mean, it's so interesting that, like the run-up in the Dow Jones, the stock market is basically driven by the 3 or 4 tech stocks. It's all about Google, Facebook, Amazon. Those are also the companies that are creating YouTube. Well, that's part of Google, but it's all creating communications. They're all about communication. And so it's hard to overestimate the importance of communications technologies today. And as the guide says, it brings people closer together. It's no longer possible to believe that somebody who's suffering from the virus in China is not like me. It's no longer possible to believe that someone in another country does not have the same feelings that I do. It's really breaking down the whole concept of the other. And television, bringing home images from all over the place, reinforces that we're all ultimately part of the same human family. And so, as I mentioned before, later on page 2, he talks about the ability to communicate on more subtle and personal levels has also greatly improved over the last decades. Psychological approaches have created a greater awareness of self, therefore a greater capacity to understand oneself, to express oneself to others, and thereby to communicate. Before this particular influx, most human beings were completely in the dark about themselves, their feelings, their needs, their true reactions, let alone those of others. It was therefore impossible to create a bridge with another person in a significant way. So,
could you say something about influx?
Yes, now that's interesting. Now, the guide talks about the influx of the Christ consciousness, which is happening with what the guide calls the New Age, which is also called the Aquarian age. And the way I see it is that this is kind of like an eros. You know, the way that the guy talks about eros as love, sex, and eros, that eros is the thing that bridges the gap, the spark between two people. And what eros does is it makes it possible, easier to do things that otherwise you couldn't do. You know, like when I really like some woman, so I'm going to go out at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I don't care where I have to find some flowers, I'm going to find them, or something nice. You go out of yourself. And the way I see it is the influx is kind of like that. In other words, it makes things possible that other things that otherwise would not be possible. That's somewhere in the lecture. In other words, that the Christ consciousness is doing something deep to people. It's changing things in ways that make us more capable of loving or being, you know, reacting on a more spiritual basis. He says this on page 5. He says, at first, the influx reaches humanity's inner consciousness. Wherever there is the slightest potential, consciousness begins to change gradually, subtly. It may change through new ways of thinking about life, or through a desire to find a way to understand the self and life more profoundly. So there's something that changes in people because of this influx. That's the way I see it. So that's operating now. So the second thing the guy talks about is, the second aspect is group consciousness. And because of communication, we're now able to understand the groups that we fall into easier. Group consciousness, he says it's a shift of people moving from, a couple of folks are coming in that I didn't even notice. Anyway, there's a shift between focusing on yourself and, as he says, until now, individuals were mainly concerned with themselves and their own interests, regardless of the effects of such concern on the rest of the world. Hi, Rita. I'm sorry I didn't let you in. I just didn't see the waiting room. And you too, Darlene. Hi, Darlene.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Darlene. Hi, Rita. I was just talking about these three aspects and about the aspect of group consciousness. And the most important thing I got out of what the guide talks about group consciousness is look about the environment. I'll read this paragraph on page 7. He says, a new awareness is growing in which people are beginning to see that if they pursue nothing but their self-interest to the detriment of others, they go far beyond violating moral and spiritual laws and values. They are beginning to see that they themselves must eventually suffer from this attitude as much as, if not more than, those they disregard with short-sighted selfishness. So I really can't imagine anything that's more, you know, that resonates more than the issue of the environment. And obviously, if you pollute your locality or whatever, if you don't pay attention to your environment, you inflict a pain on others. It's short-sighted, it's selfish, and you ultimately have to reckon with the fact that you are doing something that's against the interest of a group that you're part of. Also, interestingly enough, you know, the guide says, as he said in other lectures, especially the latest lectures, he says, new communities must spread, which represent the new values and which become models for new ways of life. The point is always to be wakeful and to never neglect the work of self-purification. This is the only key to safety. If you follow this through painstakingly in the spirit of service to fulfilling God's will, then evil forces cannot confuse you. You will always know, you will always find the answers. You will ultimately stay clean, even if there must be some temporary manifestation of your lower selves. So the last point I want to make about the last aspect, which is exposure. Now, this is, as I mentioned earlier, this lecture, the guide kind of brings it up to date, takes on current issues, I think, in a very direct way, where he talks about, listen to this, this is 1979. He says, in recent times, a great deal of hidden destructiveness has been exposed and communicated to the public. This has never before been the case in the same way and to the same degree. And it continues. Paging Edward Snowden. Something new has been set in motion. Through communication, through exposure, the whole world knows of political misdeeds that would previously have remained secret. So that's, I think, a very direct commentary. Now, in '79, you know, all I can think of was the, you know, the truth commissions about Pinochet in Argentina. We had revelations about things that had been done covertly, you know, supporting dictatorial regimes, supporting people that engaged in torture. And this has only kept going with truth commissions in Cambodia, with revelations from people like Edward Snowden. The whole concept here is that technology has made it possible for us to understand, for governments no longer to be able to hide a lot of what they do. And maybe I'm going too far afield by saying that that's what the guide is talking about, but it certainly seems that way to me. That the guide is basically saying that a lot of masks have fallen, things have become revealed. And he makes a very, very crucial, critical point about exposure, which is the important point. He says, the courage and necessary strength, and the strength necessary to bring about exposure where appropriate, stems from the inner conviction it is done in the service of a larger cause. In other words, in love. The more you expose yourself to others, to yourself, right? The path of self-finding, and subsequently to others, the more you will discover your true intrinsic worth. So he says, unless exposure is infused with love, it becomes self-defeating. And I think that this is, of course, a super important lesson to learn on the personal level, right? Because if you're trying to expose something that another person has done or that you've done and you don't do it with love, it won't work out. And you will not get the kind of reaction you want. If you're trying to do a gotcha, or you're trying to just point out something that somebody is hiding, but you don't do it with love, obviously they're not going to take it in. So that's my summary about the most important points, the way I see it in this lecture. This was the second to last lecture. And it's so interesting because I'm sure the guide knew that it was the second to last lecture, but there's no sense of urgency. You know, there's no sense of like, well, that's another paradox about the path work, that on the one hand, we are urged to do the utmost that we can for self-development, right? But on the other hand, there are many lifetimes. On the other hand, if you don't do it right, you're just gonna have to come back and do it again. So, so you get the same kind of even-tempered, serene quality from this lecture that you do from all the other ones. And I'm sure that there's a lot going on that I didn't see in this lecture. So, any thoughts? Anyone want to address some of these points or talk about your personal reflections on some of these concepts?
Yeah, Alan, you did a great summary, first off, about covering all the different manifestations of the new influx. The last one hit me strong when I was reading the lecture, Exposure. That's been kind of the first cycle during Pathwork for me to go through personally, through exposing areas in my life on a personal level, both to myself right? Digging them out, and then to the loved ones in my life. But I love this one paragraph I wanted to share with everyone toward the bottom of page 7. It says, if it is not done willingly, secret matters will be exposed through outside forces, through crises that will bring them to the surface. Once the force of the new influx is set in motion, and I really love that, that resonated with me, it cannot be halted, because in a sense, it's your intention. And it's the intention of the world. Once the intention on a personal level or of the world starts to get rolling, well, look out, because you're getting what you asked for. And ultimately, if you contract, things will come to a head. They will, the blister will pop. You'll be given another chance to come clean. And I think we're seeing that maybe in the world, as well as I know, I can just tell you from personal matters across the last couple of years since Pathwork's been in my life. Yeah, that's also occurred on a personal level. So, you know, and at the last line of this is, it hits very hard. You know, if you don't take it now, it gets more painful, basically, right? Because each time the consequences of withholding that become deeper and bigger. So it says it cannot be halted. The more opposition it encounters, the more painful the crisis will be. So, yeah.
Guide often talks about the fact that because the more spiritually developed you are, the closer cause and effect come. I just feel like for most of us, like there's just no waiting. Boom, you know, you set something in motion and
yeah,
it happens pretty quickly.
Yeah, very true. And if you look at the world circuit right now, Alan, it's interesting because a lot of comments on Facebook, they tend to be more and more from social media that, oh, we've never seen this. It's been unprecedented. This harmony that we're seeing, things are getting worse. Things are going to hell. Well, to be honest, I read that last paragraph I read, not thinking things are going to hell. I just think the blister is getting a little bit bigger. Okay, and it keeps bursting, but people are still withholding. So ultimately, it's for the good of the organism or for the world, certainly.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hi, Juan.
Juan, go ahead.
Yeah. I just want to, well, this really, first of all, I want to say thank you, Alan, for those, summary of the whole lecture. I think you key pointed all the, really the main points there. One thing that, I mean, so much in this lecture to comment about it, and so many, it really impacted me personally, really, a deep level. And one thing I first noticed was, how the guy basically begins the lecture and how he ends it. Like on the first paragraph, I find on the last sentence where he says, with this opportunity to purify themselves and serve God, they fulfill a great need in the plan of salvation. And then the last sentence that he actually says in the lectures, he says, pursue your commitment to the end. Never let up in your devotion to serve God. And it's so important how he apparently emphasized this self-work, that, the importance of really staying firm on that solid ground of devotion and love to God in, basically, everything we do. And so that aspect of it really encourages me greatly, because it really gives me the strength and the hope that, my efforts are not lost, and, whatever tiny effort that I make is going to render the right fruit at the right time. And, as he says, he really encourages us never to give up, regardless of how much difficulties and troubles and confusion that we go through. So to me, that's a very strong point there. And another aspect that really struck me was where he says, and he emphasizes this, that, you know, even those negativity, even those problems that we have in this conflict, and even how when the lower self is manifesting, this is always for our greatest good. Basically, even wars, he's saying, any negativity that is happening cannot happen alone. It's always sort of produced, is produced through the higher self, so that it can, at the end, the enlightenment to the individual, and to the collective, to the collective society. So that's another aspect that really hit me big. And I see also on paragraph 1, 2, 3, and 4 on page 3 is one very important aspect that really struck me there. And on the second sentence, he says, how often do you believe someone is mean to you when in reality this other person fears you and erroneously uses coldness or rejecting attitude as a defense? And, you know, to me personally, this is a big thing, because how often it happens to me, really, that, I find someone, I think it happens to a lot of us, that you find, wow, how rude is he or how rude is she? And, you know, we think that they just don't want to, to come to us or really connect with us in any way. But the way he explains it here is how this person is just acting out of defense. They just fear you. There is something in their subconscious that fears to, I guess, open themselves up to you, open himself or herself to you. And out of fear, they react with being cold, or even reject you. And, so often I myself take that really personal. And I'm like, oh my God, what's wrong here, So anyway, so it's really so much into this lecture that, that personally really, profoundly, struck me, really caused me to see so many aspects of myself in, the aspect of the world that we are living in today, as you were pointing out earlier, Alan. All this Christ consciousness influx is really causing all these changes and all these things that we see at a personal level and in our society right now, with this COVID-19 and also with this Trump presidency and all these things that's going on and all these riots and protests and all this. It's like all this craziness that is coming to the surface, according to the guy explains here, this is all being caused by the higher self to bring all this this negativity to the surface, so that we can understand and really move up, basically, to the higher level. That is really fastly approaching the way. So yeah, I wanted to share that.
Thank you very much, Juan.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, it's always good when the guide kind of pats us on the back, and like he says, those of God's children who have chosen to make the very best of their lives through such a path are especially blessed. That's us, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, it's so great to know.
Yeah, well, your thoughts. Nancy, what do you think?
Well, I was thinking about an experience where I felt someone was attacking me, and I was outraged and hurt. And as I thought about it, I realized I needed to learn that I wasn't defending myself. And so I think that really, for me, that exemplifies, your enemies and you're fighting, but the higher self is still working there. And it's all for the good in the end.
That's right.
But it's taken me a long time to get to that point.
Not alone.
Rita, are you with us?
Yeah. First, you pointed out that this lecture is 41 years ago, and that is pretty remarkable considering how timely it seems. what we're reading. So what Juan was saying seems to be a good way of looking at it. Any effort we make is worthwhile. So that's a good way of looking at it. And Alan, what you wrote, your essay, that's another, it's related here where we can see everything as positive. So what's negative is a way of manifesting the positive, or it's another aspect of the positive. So, and in a other lecture, the guide says something that I like this, this image, that you don't know the purpose of the house. Sometimes you're building the house, but it's not known yet what the purpose is. So that's kind of a very hopeful way, because if we don't know what aspect of the whole that we're in or inhabiting, or it can be disheartening. And I can say that I've been feeling despair and like things take too long, things I'm trying to do, and it can be frustrating, or like, what's the point? And a lot of that. So it helps to think about these ways of conceptualizing.
Yeah, well, that's about yielding to the greater self, the higher self, the intuitive self that knows how to proceed even if the ego is kind of flummoxed.
Yeah.
But what you said and what I wrote in my essay, like the fundamental paradox that on the one hand, you have free will. You can do things that are better or worse if you want to. But no matter what you do, the higher self is still at work, focusing and bringing out. In other words, if you do something negative, then as the guide often says, what you experience is exactly what you needed to experience to understand what happened. And if you didn't do it, then you didn't need to experience it.
Right.
Right. Yeah, big paradox, but a super important one. And so in some sense, there really is no going backward. Once it's interesting that somebody asked the guide, well, can you come back as a dog or like, a lower form of life? And he says, no, you can't. So you can't be reincarnated as a lower form of life. And
Really?
we've done the work to get here. We can't undo the work we've done. I believe that the guide says that in the context of reincarnation. But in other ways, everything that we've done, that we've learned through our process of self-finding, in some sense, it's sticking with us. We can choose to numb ourselves and we can choose to forget, but the work that we've done still endures, and we'll come back to it and keep progressing from that point.
That is a whole other way of thinking. The first of all, a dog could be, I've considered the possibility that dogs are higher, certain dogs. So I'm not sure that I necessarily feel like I'm more evolved than any non-human or any particular human. And I had a conversation with somebody the other day who was talking about other humans who do certain other types of jobs and I'm thinking, well, what does education have to do? What does outward manifestation of what we are, say, doing per se that could be construed as higher? Why isn't this other thing just as high, if not more so?
Well, I don't mean to get hierarchical on you or anything, or put forward a judgment, but I think the guide talks about, higher and lower forms of life. I mean, I think that in some sense there's a hierarchy that the guide talks about, and we're kind of like the bridge between I'm not sure what there is after human beings, but as the guide famously says in one lecture, that it can't be too much of a stretch for you guys to believe that there are beings of higher intelligence and wisdom than you. So it's like, yeah, you know.
Absolutely. Alan, since you spoke about, I really did not expect this meeting to go in this direction, but that's very thought-provoking. The notion of us human beings being so high on the chain of things. I don't know if anybody noticed that during the lockdown there was no interruption to the rite of spring.
Yeah, nature kept on doing its thing. This is certainly true. Tracy, what are your thoughts? Are you there?
Okay, I'm here. It just takes a minute to unmute. Well, I think I was absolutely amazed when I read this lecture about how pertinent it was for today, and sort of echoing some of the comments that have already been made. I just couldn't believe that it was, you know, channeled 40 years ago. So I think that was the main thing that hit me, and why I thought that it would be a good lecture to do now, because so many of the things, virtually everything that the guide was talking about is something that I feel like we're facing now as a society, with the pandemic, with the election, with the divisiveness that we are experiencing as a result of the election and the pandemic, and about secrets, you know, not being, you know, everything coming to the surface, which I think is a good thing. I mean, I say to Joel all the time, I'm glad I'm an old, boring woman at this point in my life, because if I'm not hiding anything, and you know, at this point, I'm so boring and old, and it's comforting, because if you were hiding something now, or doing something that you didn't want to be brought out into the open, you'd be kind of uncomfortable, I think, because there's just nothing that seems to be able to be hidden anymore, which I think is ultimately going to be a great thing. It's difficult, of course, and we're kind of geared, you know, starting as, you know, children, we want to try to, quote, get away with things, and it starts with trying to get away with things as our parents and all, from our parents, you know, whether it's like sneaking an extra cookie, or sneaking out of the house, or drinking beer, or whatever, you know, we get a charge out of that. There's part of our psyche that gets a charge of getting away with things. But I think that as you know, we go through this journey towards evolutionary increasing consciousness in an evolutionary process, that we're all going to be so much better off when we're not hiding things. Of course, you know, echoing what Kevin said, first from ourselves, that's where it starts, you know, facing, you know, like as the guide says, you know, I want to know the truth about myself, and then ultimately revealing that to the people that we love, and eventually to the people that you know, that are that's farther out in our radar screen. So I guess that's what I'm thinking.
Well, that opens up just such a interesting line of inquiry when you talk about exposure, you know, what it means, and the fact that you can't hide, right? I mean, you know, I work for the transit system, and whenever anybody dies, you know, we have to do an obit or something, and boom, Facebook, I see everything's there. It's all there. You can't, in other words, almost everybody's on Facebook, and so you can get all their details. That's a minor example, but could it be that all the compulsory sharing and the data mining is something that's really exposing a lot in a positive way? And we tend to see surveillance as being negative, but there's maybe an aspect of surveillance. I wouldn't call it surveillance, an aspect of exposure. And I saw recently a YouTube where you had like 20 people in a room, and they're all talking about how they don't like certain ethnic groups. Like someone doesn't like Germans, and somebody doesn't like Turks, and somebody doesn't like Americans. And then they all get their DNA analyzed. And of course, needless to say, it turns out that the guy that doesn't like German is 10% German, and the guy that doesn't like the Turks is 50 or 30% Turkish, and this and that. And then everyone's crying, you know, and they're saying, well, now I realize, you know, if everybody would take a DNA test, we would all see how close we really are. You know, how the family is one family. So that's another aspect of exposure, right? I mean, the DNA analysis.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Alan, where was that?
Well, it's a YouTube. I don't remember where I saw it, but it's.
I saw it too.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, on Facebook I've seen it.
It's really lovely. It's that's what it is. And of course, I've got a friend of mine in transit who.
What would you Google exactly?
When
I was just about to say, if you come up with the right keywords, it'll come up.
Which would they be?
You have to be creative, and I don't have it in front of me that I can do it, but this is how I would do it. I would say, okay, so it's DNA first, of course, has to be in there. And then who you didn't know you were. I don't know how to put that in smaller words, but what you didn't know you were. And of course, do it on YouTube. I'm saying Google, but it has to be, eventually you put it on YouTube. But you come up with those keywords and you'll find it. I'll try to do it. I can do it another time, but.
Well, if you were really tech savvy, you could share it to the group right now. But.
Oh, well, no, that's not a tech savvy thing. Believe it or not, that's a literary thing. Coming up with keywords is being able to use the language.
Right.
So,
Another aspect of communication.
I'm sorry, what?
Very important. Another aspect of communication.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one I'm good at. That one I know.
Now, I mean, the whole DNA thing, I think, is really valuable. Not only is it identifying serial killers, but it also lets people like my friends in transit who talks to guys that are proud Puerto Ricans and they say they came from a certain ethnic group, and he says, no, you didn't. Get your DNA analyzed. You're this and you're that. You don't, you're not who you identify with if you really look at your DNA.
Do they like hearing that?
No, they don't like hearing it, but he doesn't care.
No, but that's an important point, that who you identify with or who you think what you think your identity is really some query. That's the best thing to do. Find out who you think you are, what your identity is based on. And you can use DNA or you use your own history, your family history in your mind. That's an excellent question. I'd just like to mention that I really liked, I don't have the lecture in front of me because I listened to it. I listened to it twice, but I don't have it in front of me to quote it. But I really liked the idea of the groups and how we're changing. So you have to tell me what the words were, but how we're changing from, let's say Americans, certainly Americans, from being so individualistic. And I'm in this. This is me 100% being very, I don't want to say ego. I think in some ways my ego has grown better. But being very self-confident, needing only myself in a lot of ways. And that's how I was brought up, and that's how America's been going in that direction. And actually talking about consciousness has been going in that direction, that we find out about ourselves psychologically so that we know more about who we are and we get to whatever. But the lecture said that we're beginning to see a more of a group mentality, not a masses, obviously not negative, but a group mentality. For me personally, go ahead, say that, what, Alan?
I mean, as opposed to, talks about in other lectures, group consciousness and mass consciousness, like the famous mass image of self-importance, mass images which are not constructive and creative. And there's a lecture, I think, called The Alternation Between Individual and Group Consciousness.
But this one that struck me, because I took it personally, is that I'm going to use my words, that you can rely, you can trust. This is a big one today.
Very advanced creatures here. There he is.
Oh, sorry.
Olive.
Oh.
Olive.
Rita, Alan is bringing a dog on in order to show you the level of the dog.
Where's that dog, really?
Anyway, I'm just gonna close this up. But personally, for me, I'm not used to relying on other people, and trusting. I'm okay with the trusting, but relying. So I mean, they're pretty much the same. But I can handle it myself. Well, when I was reading about that, I was thinking about this group right here. This group is going to be, I mean, obviously I've been in it for 3 years at least now, is important for my support in the work that I'm doing, which is on the evolution of consciousness. And it's very scary work, including, of course, in the middle of COVID and the middle of Trump, in the middle of everything, and the people in the demonstrations that are ruining the demonstration, all of that. So that's a very scary time. But when you're doing your own work too, I'm going to say it out loud because this is exposure. You need help, Kay. You need to rely on people who understand where you're coming from, what your take on this, and why you're feeling very, very anxious in some ways, but unbalanced. I feel very unbalanced. But I shouldn't say very, but and for the therapists in the group, I'm going to a therapy on a computer, but with a woman, with a therapist on Monday. I have an appointment because of my vestibular as well. I have this physical imbalance going on. Anyway, long story to say, thank you, group. And I intend to be able to rely on you. If I need you, I hope you'll be there. That's my thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yay.
Amen, Kay. Definitely. And great job on therapy too. That's wonderful.
Beverly, do you have some thoughts you want to share with us?
I guess so. A lot of the main points that I took from this lecture have been already spoken about. But the first thing that hit me with this lecture, I was listening to it, I didn't read it. I tried a new experiment to see if I could get through it better if I listened to it than read it, was when they talked about if there are people, if you're having a conflict that the higher selves are conspiring to fix it for you.
Yeah.
And
Way to put it.
my first thought was, there's this one woman in my job who I don't like, who I work very hard to stay away from. And then I got anxious and I thought, ugh, what is my higher self going to do? It's going to make me have to deal with her. That was just my first thought. Because I'm working real hard to stay out of her crosshairs. And I thought a lot of things during this lecture, but I guess the other big thing is similar to what Juan said before. The part about, what was it? That if you're working hard to purify yourself, that keeps you safe. And that notion is very important to me because I'm always anxious about things going wrong or doing the wrong thing, but I'm also always trying to make sure that I'm not. So that notion of safety was very, I like that idea very much.
Well,
Those are the two main things.
Yeah. Wow, listen, guys. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, dead at 87.
No.
Oh no.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Can't go through until after the election.
Hopefully, well.
They'll try.
I'm here, I'm not thinking of Ruth. I should have been thinking of Ruth, but I'm thinking of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
But both.
Sad.
Well, the lecture would tell us that something negative is trying to work out towards something positive.
You're right.
Exactly.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you.
And also, there's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Thanks for the reminder.
Oh, God. It's funny how things can shift in a minute.
Yeah, in an instant.
She tried hard not to die on
She
us.
really did.
She really
She
did.
really
She
put
really
her,
did.
and she stayed for as long as she could.
Oh, God bless her. Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Well, it's not over till it's over.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing that this hit me in this lecture. I remember when I first started this group, I remember I was carrying on about Trump. And now things have just gotten so absurd that I've kind of like let it go in a weird kind of way. I don't get caught up in the drama of it anymore because it's just so goddamn crazy that there's just no point in thinking, oh, this is terrible. It's just absurd. So I've just gotten to the place where I just have to watch it and see, okay, what next? Oh, well. And that's that's related to the lecture in terms of finally getting to the point where I'm not seeing things as evil and good, because God knows what's going on, you know, and you can't trust what anybody says, I feel, and you don't know who's telling the truth, and you don't know who's manipulating what. So there's no point in having any opinions about anything because nobody has a clue. So all I can do is just watch it and try not to be afraid, except for I just had a little bit of fear go by when you said about poor Ruth, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And attend to your own personal process.
Right.
This whole concept of safety is such an interesting thing. I mean, what exactly is safety? Is it your personal integrity, your physical integrity, that you're not going to die, that you're not sick? Is it your spiritual integrity? I've always thought that, you know, the spiritual death is more serious than physical death. You know, and spiritual death is really what is to be most concerned about. Safety is, you know, safety is something that, what exactly security is. And of course, the guide always says that, you know, people pin the label of security on all kinds of things, you know, money, let's say, a good relationship, let's say, a nice house, you know, let's say getting your book finished, getting your collection finished, taking care of, but actually there's only one thing that's security, that's God. That's your path to God, your path to to the divine core. Anything else is just a substitute. Anything else is just an imitation of that. So, and of course, as somebody pointed out, that when you are dedicated to the path of purification, the evil can't touch you. And I guess that's even true in Trump's America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good point, Alan. It comes down to, for me, a lot of that security and how you define it comes down to who or what you identify as and who and what you identify with. It's identity. And I'm not saying that brainwashing yourself into something you don't believe is the way to go, but rather there's a natural progression of a grander scale of your identity when you start working with the hidden areas of yourself in the trust of the higher self, because you more over time start identifying with that higher self, and the lower self is free to be, because you know it's working for the good as well and being directed ultimately for your identity, which is the higher self, the God self within. So I think one of the things that also helped me to see that in this lecture was in that area where they're talking about the higher self. Again, I think Beverly and Juan mentioned it, a few of you mentioned it already, where they were kind of conspiring to work for the common good, even though you were having an argument, let's say a really bitter argument or a really stressful day with somebody, or you're staying away from them, so you're isolating yourself. And, you know, these are just the chess pieces on a much larger scale. And the image that it conjures up in me, Beverly, that I kind of, when I drift into insecurity, I remember that, you know, it's not a question of light and darkness being the absence of light and being evil, but it's light and harmony of light, or just disharmony or distortions of light. Okay, so evil to me is not darkness. It's not absence of light. It's the distortions of that light, or the distortions of that harmony in sound or in working together. And so it's not pointing at the right, or it's not pointing at Trump, even though he is ridiculous in my view personally, but it's pointing towards how do we communicate in order to find that harmony and to work towards, you know, the next step. And the truth is that it's happening anyway. It's happening with us, through us, right, as us. So yeah, it ultimately is that identity.
Ellen, do you have any thoughts that you want to share?
Hi. Hi there. Hi. Well, I guess the thing that keeps coming into my mind about communication, and I did read the lecture. Unfortunately, it was a crazy week, so I don't know if I read it as carefully as I read the last one that when I missed, which was nuts. But about the distortion of communication, and in light of 40 years that it was written 40 years ago. So because there's so much. There's just that there's also so much more distortion, all the propaganda, that there's such an influx of propaganda. I guess there's always been, but it seems like there's so much more. So all of the news outlets and all of the the thing about Facebook and Twitter, what can come out and what, the things that can be said that are not true. And I think, it's hard to be articulate about it, but that's just what strikes me. It's like, if we're talking about Trump, it's like the fact that such a large portion, that this person who's like so obviously just, that so many people don't see. What does that say about communication? So I don't know. That's what's striking me right now. And I don't know, this is a personal note, but it's, I'm a singer and I'm having a thyroid issue and my throat is, so I'm having my own personal kind of, what's going on with my communication center? Fascinating.
Oh, no.
It's really a fascinating thing. And also in this process, it's like I'm being blocked, but also there's clearly something that I'm learning. I was singing, I have a songwriters group and I was singing my songs and it's like, I don't know what's going to happen with my voice. And yet there's some lesson being learned even in the blockage of this communication, my communication center. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, that's such an important thing to ask for guidance or inspiration about something that appears to be negative, right? Like, what is the lesson that it's trying to teach me?
Yeah, that's really
Yeah. And to Ellen's point, that thing that I read initially, which was the more opposition it encounters, the more painful the crisis will be. Well, that's 40 years on from the lecture. The pain is increasing, is it not? And the dissonance is increasing. And I don't want to paint the future as bleak, but if the slope continues the way that it is, there will be some more pain. And it will get deeper for some people, and for some people here, maybe not within our group, maybe we feed off of it, maybe whatever, but it's going to feel darker, let's say, before we notice maybe sometimes what it's working towards. But I think don't lose faith in that. Don't hold on to that, because that's the truth. It's borne out in your life. I know it is. And it's borne out in the globe too as well.
I think we lost Teresa. Maybe she'll come back though. Well, Jaron, do you have any thoughts? We haven't heard from you yet. Pathwork helper. What's on your mind?
Oh, you're muted.
I am?
No, Jaron.
You're muted. I'm gonna unmute you. Can't hear you.
Okay, how's that?
Good.
Okay. I have not done Zoom very much, so sorry about my illiteracy here. You hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So in thinking about this lecture and that first aspect of communication that the guide talks about, communication to me is sort of part and parcel of consciousness. And I love the way the guide describes the divine as all consciousness. So that when we can inhabit a moment where we're in conflict with someone, I always like the term FGO, friggin' growth opportunity. So we have a moment where we can take a look and see what's going on in ourselves. Is this my idealized self playing out here? Is this an old image or misconception that I've been acting on for my whole life that's still here and needs work. So huge opportunities, hundreds of times a day in a lot of cases. So that always kind of struck me about, that part of the lecture. The other part in where he talks about, I always wonder, is the guide male or female or both? I kind of think both myself, but the aspect of communication and where that transitions into group consciousness, I kind of feel like when two people are engaged in a conflict and they can drop down out of our egos to work toward resolution, that actually ripples through the fabric of the entire universe. So we are intending our precious moment to change the universe in a way that is more open and communicative, in a way that is loving and positive and creative. So those kind of things get to me, and that when we can bring that awareness to those moments, then exposure becomes second nature, where we don't think about it. We're just there exposing, and it can be humbling.
Oops.
And we want to hide it. Usually that passes in a relatively short period of time. It's very enlightening, not only in the way of higher awareness, but we feel lighter. Just to me, that's where my heart space becomes more available to me and to my life. And that's what I'm here for.
Well, what you say about the ripple effect, the guide does talk about that a lot. And that's something that I think many of us have to accept on faith, that these emanations from our work really are meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. We're not in a vacuum. We're not in a vacuum. And I wanted to mention too that I liked your essay where you were bringing about the moment, being much more non-static, not fixed in a certain, that the moment can move forward into the future and backward into the past simultaneously. So where we're actually affecting our past actions as well as the future. So we're in a way kind of doing a very cool expanded awareness of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think that's what I was trying to get at.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of spiritual growth kind of happens in a dimension outside of time.
Mm-hmm.
Other paradox, right? I mean, our effort happens within time, but somehow it also doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I completely agree, especially that we affect the past. Well, the Course says that you affect the past in order to go to the future in a clearer way. But we affect the past. It's amazing, which affects the future, the present.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Mm-hmm. My pleasure.
Well, my friends, I think we should do a small meditation for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and thank her for her work on earth.
She suffered a lot.
So valuable, right? So valuable. Oh, and Darlene, I don't mean to ignore you. If you want to say something, please do. Please do if you like.
I'm good. Thanks.
All right. So yeah, I just feel that that's a big blow, I mean, to the country. And so I feel like, let's meditate on the value, the significance, the importance of her life. Shall we do that? Shall we give ourselves 5 minutes to meditate on what she has meant to America, to our country,
That's good.
and absorb some of the lessons I think she was trying to teach? Thank her for fulfilling her task on Earth. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to, can I share something?
Sure, of course.
So from the beginning, when you first spoke, it kept coming to me to think, well, like the divine influx, it takes me being receptive to it, you know, and how in my own life recently, I really have been aware of how much I try in my ego consciousness or my training, my education, my habits, my whatever, and I forget to be receptive. I think of that lecture about activity and receptivity, you know, and balance, and about this influx, and like, and how do I experience the influx? You know, not just conceptually, like I conceptually agree and understand that, you know, what's negative really has what's the positive underneath it, and, you know, in myself and in the world, you know, in the country and COVID and everything. But like moment to moment, like when, for me, it's really when I choose to drop from my problem solving, figuring it out, into going inside and being empty, being in that I don't know land, just being empty and listening, being receptive. That's when I feel like when there's a problem and I'm thinking it through and I'm going back and forth, this and that, or when like I'm working as a pathwork helper, but I'm a psychotherapist and I sort of try to do them together to the extent people are, want that, meeting a person where they are. Sometimes I just like, I don't know what to do, or I'm like, I feel flummoxed, as you said, that you said something about the higher self knows how to proceed, even if the personality self is flummoxed. You just said that, and you have to do it wrong to learn to do it right. So I'll suddenly be aware that I'm trying really hard, and then to stop trying and just drop in and listen and trust. And it's sort of like it's an ease, because there's a relaxation, but there really has to do with faith and trust. And the whole pathwork is about really having faith. This whole thing is about faith in life itself.
Yeah.
And trust.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about that a lot, and also like praying more, and like I've been thinking, like, what is prayer? You think, well, what is prayer exactly? How am I praying? What is it? What am I doing? And the God image and all that. And for me, just to like drop in and just give over and just hold the other person, like with call in forces that are larger than myself or greater than myself, the divine influx. I'll sort of do that for somebody else, from myself, through whatever, how that works. But so that's sort of all the things everyone said is very, very meaningful, and I appreciate that. That in particular, I've been thinking of in my own life, to be really, really personally, my personal life, receptive to the influx. And how do I do that? How do I
That's, I think, a very important question for all of us, because the guide often says that if you resist the influx, there's something happens, can be destructive. People, I always had this vision when reading some of the lectures, the later lectures, that somehow cataclysms happen, but not to the believers in the pathwork. In other words, it's possible to form communities where you don't get swept away by the tsunami. And I think it must be like that, right, in our personal lives. In other words, if we ourselves can somehow roll with the punches, it's not a good metaphor, but in other words, if you're able to let the ego go and roll with what you deeply know, then you're going to be all right. You know, where it's the old thing about the tree bending and not breaking.
Well, for me, the bending is like knowing that when I don't know.
Right.
And that's when I really
Right.
give over.
Yeah.
Like we talked about that politically, like we don't, gee, what the hell is going on in the climate? This is horrible, whatever, but what to do or why. But just like in my like personal moment to moment with someone or something or within myself, just to be in that. The truth is that I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Very good to cultivate that awareness. And the ego is extremely tenacious. It doesn't like that.
Yeah, oh, mine is.
It doesn't like it. It doesn't like it, and it wants to prevent the greater self from going there.
Yep.
Yeah. Those of us who make a living and also kind of pride ourselves on being problem solvers, either in our daily work or in our therapy or in ourselves or in the path work. You're so right, Margaret. It's not in the head and conceptualization of it. It's in the being of that state of not knowing how. Sometimes that's the most authentic. And, go ahead.
Sorry. No, but just I was thinking about the superiority. Like I think I function mostly like my personality self, my ego self is superior to the spiritual self. I mean, really, like that.
Right.
I function like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I share that arrogance too, honestly. And I don't mean that in a negative
It's just a
way,
habit.
but it's a habit. Yes, exactly. It's that I'm the answer person, or I have this to offer. This is how I solved my problems in the world. This is how I'm successful, or whatever the case may be. But sometimes the greatest vulnerability and truth that we can find with ourselves is to drop down into that place of saying, you know what, I really don't have the answer here. And in my being, I mean, and what you feel in that moment. It's really good, Margaret. Thank you.
Well, it's sort of like a self-driving car. Not a good metaphor, but you don't trust the self-driving car. You can't get out of the driver's seat, even though you know it's gonna drive itself. It's a thought. Hey, Jerem, I think you're breaking up. Your image is frozen. I don't know if you can hear me, but do you have like a slow connection? I'm just saying, if you're saying anything, I can't hear you. Okay. Any thoughts? Nancy.
Well, when I was a therapist and I would feel flummoxed, I would kind of let go. And I didn't know what to do, and a way would come. It would just come to me as to how to proceed. That happened so many times. But it wasn't conscious. So I really identify with what you're saying, Margaret.
Well, we are all lucky and fortunate to live at a time where the divine influx is coming into the world, where even though it creates tumult,
Understatement.
we're fortunate here. And of course, the guide always says, that we're also so fortunate to be on the earth where we can actually change things and make so much faster progress than we can make in the spirit world, where everything is apparent and there is no deception and everything is visible. We need to work through, and you can't work through the lower self there, I guess, because you feel the higher self so intensely. Anyway.
I also feel like it's going to get worse. Somebody mentioned it earlier. It is going to get worse. But that doesn't mean that we're going to get worse. I think people like us, right? People who are attentive to what's actually happening, not what we see, not what we hear on television or in the newspaper, but attentive to what's actually happening, and not get involved, not be detached totally, but in some way step back, because we know, and we have to remind ourselves, but we know that there's a greater good going on, and just don't step into it. But it's not going to get better until it gets worse. Heads up.
Well, don't step into fear.
Exactly. Who just said that? Margaret? I didn't see you speaking. Yes, that is exactly it. Don't step into the fear. The
Well, I
fear
think
is like,
uh,
go ahead, Helen, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say that, you know, because of our work on ourselves, we have these tools available to us. We know how to communicate. We know what that's about. We know what we have to do in order to communicate. And we also understand about group consciousness, and we also understand the importance of exposure. So these are tools that we have at our disposal here, because we're fortunate enough and lucky enough. I guess we all chose this pathwork, right? You know, we've all seen each other probably in other lives. We've been together at other times, but it's always good to be part of our family here, you know, where we can devote ourselves to our search for God, our search
Amen.
for what's inside.
Amen.
Divine.
I don't know. I just wanted to say that when Kay said that things are going to get worse, it didn't scare me. And I just wanted to say that. I wanted to hear myself say that out loud. I'm not sure if I can say anything more eloquent about it, but it's just like, things are getting worse, but we're not getting worse.
Mm-hmm.
That if we're observing it, and there's something that's not at the mercy of that thing that's getting worse. So I guess I kind of knew that when you said it at some level. So thank you, Kay.
I love your words. We're not at the mercy of what's getting worse. We're not going to be heroes, but we're not going to be victims.
Amen.
Either one.
Amen.
We're going to be observing, and if we're needed at some specific case, then we do what we need to do, and then we can step back and watch again and be aware.
If there's one very prominent thing the guide always says, although it's not in this lecture, you know, is that there aren't any victims. The guide rejects the concept of the victim. You know, and I'm reminded of, I worked for EMS, the union, for 12 years, and these guys, they just love getting into the action. The EMTs and paramedics, they jump on it. You know, like the firemen everyone wanted to be at the World Trade because it was the biggest job around. So in a sense, you know, maybe path workers, not to stretch the metaphor, you know, we like to go where there might be conflict because we can see it more clearly. We can, you know, we're not afraid. In other words, we know there's really deeply, fundamentally, there's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah, our identity is not assailable as much as it was before the pathwork.
Or we want to go through the great locked door of fear, like we want to go through it. You know, like, okay, I gotta go through
Maybe
this.
that's part of our learnings, right? But just be gentle with yourself in case you are afraid. Don't, you know, allow it to be. If it does come up, don't push it away. Allow it to come up and live with you, and allow it to leave when it's ready for it, you know, because it won't stay forever. That's the one thing that's for sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit of, you know, my personal experience of what I'm going through, you know, on a personal level with, you know, with the three aspects of the lectures. But, you know, to your original point, Kay, it's a beautiful exhortation on the last paragraph, on the last page of the lecture, page 9. The paragraph before the last one, the guy says, look at this beautiful world with the eyes that sees the whole, that comprehends the Lord working behind all that is. Let your heart be filled with the freshness of life's healing power that flows from the source that encompasses all that ever was created and ever will be created. So that's a beautiful, way the guide exhorting us. Exhorting us to really, look at the world from that angle, really not from the tragic view of, my God, what is going on, and things are going to get worse, and what's going to happen. But to really, I guess, make that personal effort to just look at it as, I guess, as the Lord is saying it, which is quite a this is quite a task for us, maybe. But I think it's worth trying, definitely. Yeah. But if I'm allowed, just a few minutes, I would like to share more, like my personal experience with, I guess, how the influx is personally affecting me. With three aspects of the lecture, which are communication, group consciousness, and exposure. And really, communication to me, I personally had a lot of problem with that, because I think the guy points it out that first, to really be able to communicate, and this was my problem, before I can communicate what I feel, I have to know what I feel. I have to really, I guess, be connected with what I am feeling. And of course, when you are not really, you haven't done, I guess, that much spiritual work, you are kind of divided. You're not really connected with your feelings. And that takes a lot of work. So now I realize that, and I am learning and I'm progressing in this direction, that when I really come to know and really connect to my feelings, it seems so much easier for me to just communicate to someone else what it is that I am feeling. And, I had a lot of trouble with that. And, the grace of God, and I guess through my effort, I'm ascending, in that direction. So that's a beautiful thing. And then, and the group consciousness, that was another aspect where I had problem, because there was this fear of wanting to really like become one with groups. I seem to feel like better when I am just like kind of alone or isolated. And I guess one thing connects to the other. The communication part, the group consciousness part, it was a great fear there, because somehow I fear again to to become a part of any group, and because and I realize now that as the guy explains here in this lecture, that this fear come from thinking, I guess, subconsciously to a great degree, that I in becoming one with the group, I kind of lose my own individuality. And this is very, very big for me, I find, because then there is that resistance there to really become one with anything. And just because out of this fear that I am, I'm going to be annihilated, that like I'm going to be I don't know, it's a subconscious fear that I'm going to just lose myself in becoming a one with a whole, so to speak. So there was a great resistance there, and I through this lecture, I realized that, as the guide explains, in resisting this this union, or this becoming one with the group, I am resisting my own innate fate, because really that's the fate of every individual, every soul, to eventually become one with the whole. So in fighting, and I think this is what's going on also at a greater level, larger level, that we resist, and because out of this resistance and fear, then it happens that a crisis arises, because you're like fighting against the inner current that is trying to direct me to what is my innate fate. Again, I'm learning more and more, and especially with this lecture, it's been very, very helpful to to make me realize the importance of this. And then the part of the exposure also, it was always also this fear of exposing myself, because I don't know how I'm going to be, if I'm going to be understood, or are they going to really understand what I'm trying to say, or this lack of I guess lack of openness. I was afraid to just like open up and just like allow myself to expose myself, because again, I guess I didn't know, I was not connected with my own inner self. So there was this fear of, I don't even know who I am myself. So I don't know if I expose myself, what it's going to be. Maybe this fear of they are going to find out who I really am. This insecurity, all this lack of, of confidence that is in me and everything. So I was also afraid to really like expose that out there, out of fear that I just don't know how others are going to react to my openness. So I had a great reluctance to that, and through this lecture again, and through my own self work, slowly I feel that I am overcoming these issues, and I guess that's how the current influx that the guy talks about is personally affecting me. So it's just very relieving to know that that it all makes sense, and it will at the end bring the right result. So it's a beautiful thing in general. So just wanted to share that. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Juan.
Hey, Teresa, would you like to say something? You just came back. Are you there? She's here, but maybe she can't hear us. Well, I'm just struck again by the beautiful energy that we create together as a group. It's a very good, nourishing energy that we have here, which I think we can draw on. I do think about our group sometimes when we're not meeting. And I feel like we're creating a good spiritual form, this group. And the guide says that every consciousness creates a form in the spirit world. And I wonder how our group looks like, how it appears to the guide or other spirits. It's kind of nice to think about. So, unless anyone has any other thoughts, I think we should have another meditation. And take the good energy that we manifest, especially reflecting on the value of these three aspects. Now that we understand how to communicate the value of our group and the value of the concept of exposure. It's a good thing that a lot of things are being exposed in the world. The guide always says that the mask self is really not better than the lower. The lower self is in some way to be preferred over the mask. At least the lower self is honest. And it's a good thing that we're able to look at things in perspective and look at everybody as an individual, and also have access to our intuition, so we know the next steps to take if we just tune in to our inner voice. So let's have a 10-minute meditation to close out our meeting tonight, and meditate on, I'm just going to meditate on the joy that I feel being privileged enough to be a spiritual seeker here on earth, and also privileged to know you all and to be on this path with you. I thank the Pathwork Guide for all of his inspiration and wisdom. All right, 10 minutes.